Okay, so I'm going to put a lettuce edge serger hem on this. I'll be doing it both in serger and zigzag. This one's going to be the serger. You can use thread to match, or you can use a contrasting color. I'm going to do a contrasting color so you see it better. And I'm going to start by demonstrating it on just a scrap of fabric. The amount of ruffle you get, I guess I should say, is a lettuce edge hem is one where you're going to curl the edge, basically. The amount of ruffle that you get is going to depend on a few things. It's going to be how hard you stretch it, how stretchy the fabric is, and how short your stitch length is. So the shorter your stitch length is, the better it's going to ruffle. The further you can stretch it, and the further you do stretch it, the more ruffle you're going to get. But it's very customizable in what you do. So I've got my serger set up with 3-thread rolled hem, and I've got it on the shortest stitch length for this. So what I'm going to do is just get it started and pull it. Now I like to, I cut that really bad because it's scrap, but I like to have the good side facing down and pull it so it curls a little bit to the inside. I find that gives you the cleanest edge when you do this. So you want to pull it as far as you can, and you're not going to pull it out. You're going to move it along, but basically let the serger do the work. So I'm not going to bother doing the whole thing, but you see that's when I've stretched it all the way. So that was with a short stitch and stretching it pretty hard. Now if I were to do not pulling it very hard. So say I do this, but I only pull a little bit. So you get a bit of a different effect for two different reasons, or I guess in two ways. So not only is it not as roughly, you can see more fabric through the stitching. And that's because when you have it as a really short stitch, you're cramming more stitches per inch, which causes the ruffle, but it also causes a more solid color on the edge there. So if you're doing a contrasting color, it's good to do a lot of stitches in a small area instead of this, because this isn't going to be quite as visible from a distance. I guess that's not that bad. Anyway, so that's kind of the example of how it looks stretched versus not. So when you're doing it on a dress, I like to just even the edge up really well. Flip the hem over slightly. And I know some people, like, so I flip because I like the clean edge, you know, like it won't have, let's see if it did any at the beginning. Sometimes you can get some like little bubbling and stuff if there's a raw edge in there, and I just like to avoid that by folding it. A lot of people do it right on the edge. A lot of people will do a woolly nylon in this, and sometimes that'll make it look thicker also. I don't bother. Another thing you can do is if you're really accurate with where you're stitching, you can go over this a second time, and that'll give you even more of a ruffle. I usually don't bother with that because I don't find that it gives enough to be worth the effort. But that's something you can keep in mind. Anyways, so we're going to start on one of the seams, fold it over. As you can see, that's going to be kind of the degree of ruffle you get. This is a really good 4-way stretch that has a relatively even amount of stretch both ways. If you find that you've got a fabric that doesn't have an equal amount of stretch lengthwise and widthwise, what you're going to find is that at some parts of the skirt you're going to get a lot of ruffle, and others you're not going to get as much just because it doesn't stretch as much. So just keep that in mind. If you're doing a double skirt and you've got that, usually I'll offset, so I'll do one skirt cut with the grain facing one way and the other skirt the other way, and then the amount of ruffle will even out, if that makes sense. Anyways, I'm going to finish sewing this hem. That's a lot. You only really need to have just a little bit folded over. So as you can see, as I'm going, I am pulling it behind in that I'm holding it taut both ways, but I'm not pulling it through the machine. I'm letting the machine do the work, just because if I do pull it myself, then it's going to not stretch as much. Like it'll basically sew faster than the amount of stretch it would be, and it'll have less stitches per inch if I do it that way than if I just let it do its thing. I'll do some right on the edge too without folding it. So actually, I guess it doesn't look that much different. Some fabrics, it'll make a big difference if it's on the edge or folded, so I just kind of fold out of habit. So then as I come to the end, I'll sew over where I've already sewn, and I just make an effort not to cut off any that I've already done, because then you're going to get little bits of thread hanging out. Then just finish it off. So it's the underskirt, but you can see that's kind of the ruffle, and it's called lettuce edge because it's supposed to look like lettuce. More like kale, but it's lettuce edge.